City folks, what are some things that rural folks wouldn't understand? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. The way that people are considerate to each other is very different in urban versus rural. In rural areas, you show respect and consideration by acknowledging each other, saying hi on the street, chatting with the cashier, etc. In urban areas, you show the same by allowing everyone to go about their business. You move to the side if you are walking more slowly than everyone else. You don't catch anyone's eye in case they think you're about to ask for something. And you quietly and efficiently help someone who needs it, like bringing a stroller up the subway stairs, so that those people can move effectively through the space as well. Each area finds the other area's way of doing things annoying or rude. Story 2. The joy of anonymity. I've never lived in a small town, but one thing I've always heard is that everyone knows everyone. To a lot of people, that probably seems like a good thing. It's friendlier and people say hi on the street and all that. To me, that sounds like a nightmare. I'd feel exposed all the time, like I'd always have to be ready for a conversation and everyone would know what I'm doing all the time. Anonymity is freeing. You can just go where you want and do what you want, and as long as you're not actively bothering someone, they don't give a what you're up to. You can choose when and where to socialize, and unexpected run-ins with people you know are relatively uncommon. So if you're not feeling social, you don't have to be. Story 3. My wife grew up in a rural community. I grew up bouncing between Detroit and New York. The first time I took my wife to a large city to see my family was the first time she had ever been to a large city. I had to very quickly explain that if random strangers on the street try to stop her and talk, it is likely they are asking for money. She was almost scammed into buying day-old newspapers a couple times, and some guy in a character costume almost convinced her to take a selfie with them. Please never do this. Never take a selfie with a random person in a mascot character costume in the city. Inversely, the 100-ish residents of her small farm town knew me as a gigantic prick for years because I would never engage with strangers who spoke to me at the gas station or dollar store, the only two locations out here. I am not joking. But the reason I would blow people off or give them the cold shoulder is because it was genuinely wild to me that strangers would just talk to each other in public. And they didn't want anything from me. Story 4. We treat busy sidewalks like highways. You wouldn't stop in the middle of the highway to figure out where you're going. You wouldn't stop in the middle of the highway to take pictures. You wouldn't weave back and forth across the lanes just for kicks. You wouldn't drive 4 abreast with your friends and take up the entire road. If you need to stop somewhere, pull over to the side and get out of the way. Story 5. That a lot of people don't drive. Even many people who can afford cars decide not to get one because it often isn't worth the hassle. I live walking distance from a subway station where trains come every 6 minutes during rush hour and 10 minutes off peak, as well as a bus line where buses come as often as every 3 minutes. Why would I ever drive when I have all my essentials within walking distance and can get anywhere else in the city that easily? And if I want to leave the city, we have apps you can rent a car with. You can even walk up to a rental car not in use and open it with your phone. Story 6. Lived in a village of maybe 1,000 people when I was growing up, and not that long ago, I'm 40. The grocery store, singular, not plural, closed at 6 p.m. on Saturdays and wasn't open on Sundays. Closest place with better operating hours was a 50-minute drive away. I think they're open on Sundays now as of a few years ago. 5 or 6 years back, the one grocery store burned down. I don't know about small towns y'all live in, but a lot of fires that happen there are just insurance fraud schemes. And for like 6 months, there just wasn't a local grocery store. And it's a pretty poor area with no real public transit, so folks in the community had to organize carpools to the grocery store one village over so that folks who don't own cars could actually get groceries. Story 7. There is generally an inherent set of manners in which most people go by in the city to make things easier and faster for people to deal with large crowds. A lot of people try to fit the manners of living in rural areas to cities, rather than try to learn the manners of city living, and get very frustrated when people in the city collectively treat them as rude. I had to explain this to my mom. If I had to say, "Excuse me," anytime someone was in my way, or vice versa, we would never get anywhere. When commuting in a large crowd, you just need to be self-aware of your place and make sure you are paying attention as you move around. I find that I get frustrated when people who aren't used to it just stop moving during rush hour and hold everyone up. Story 8. I worked on a TV show with some incredibly rural people, and they would say things like, "If I lived in a city, I would immediately get shot, get into fights," and it struck me as so weird. because only in the country are people quick to get into your business and start. I live in a city and everyone just minds their own business unless you go out of your way to start something yourself. You can be weird in the city and no one will give a single about it, but in the country everyone knows who you are and has an opinion about you. You'd think because you hear about cities being super violent that random violence just happens, but no one has ever been so openly hostile to me as when I was working in the country as an outsider. Story 9. I lived in a town of less than 3,000 in Iowa for a while after college. I grew up in the suburbs of a major city and spent a lot of time in the city both before and after Iowa. It was 98x white. I don't think most understand how exposure to people not like you is so important, and it can make you a much better person. That you don't have to fear those that are different than you. They could never understand the pleasure of being able to walk anywhere to fulfill all your needs, and that public transportation can be so amazing. The absolute pleasure of having real choice because there isn't just one of any type of store, or worse, one store doing everything. Story 10. Most big cities are very safe for the average person. The people who approach you on the street aren't dangerous, just annoying. Rural freedom is often attached to suffocating social oppression. There are only a few acceptable ways of being. The larger the city, the more you can be whoever you want to be and look however you want to look. You have anonymity. There's a reason that the weird, quiet kid you went to high school with moved away and then popped up a few years later on social media looking amazing, happy, and successful. Story 11. Multiculturalism and diversity. Having lived in NYC growing up, I was able to interact with many different cultures, religions, sexual and gender orientations. Living in the suburbs now, the diversity of population is not nearly as vast, but still offers a bit of a mix. Seems to me, when I visit rural areas, it's a very homogeneous population, which I can imagine makes it really difficult for people to understand and appreciate, tolerate other cultures and worldwide. WS. I think every rural American should be required to spend 2 weeks in a major American city and city folks to spend 2 weeks in rural AME. This would go a long way to healing our culture divide. Story 12. If I turn left out of my house, I have about 30 minus 50 restaurants, bars, a decent-sized music venue that gets mid-level acts coming through, a community center that has community events and a farmer's market every weekend, a comic shop and game story, a Regal movie theater with IMAX and a small indie theater that shows all kinds of smaller films and older stuff, an arcade, multiple gyms, and a subway stop that gets me access to the rest of the larger city area. There's even a beer garden that does things like Casual Magic, The Gathering Thursdays, and seasonal events like Oktoberfest. Pretty. If I turn right out of my house, it's a suburban neighborhood that quickly turns into a fully wooded area with nice, well-kept trails to take my dog for a walk and a golf course a little further up the way. I don't have an HOA. While there is some crime, you know what areas to stay out of and where the homeless linger. So after about a week of living here, you figure out it's actually really safe if you're not a complete moron. I also own half of a farming business in a rural area and visit a couple times a year to do planting. I'm primarily an investor, but I like to plant stuff. Variety. The answer is variety. Near my farm, after about a month, it's time to cycle back through the activities I did last month. At my home, there is a functionally infinite amount of variety within walking distance. When I'm living rural, doing anything out of the norm is an hour-plus drive by default. Story 13. People simply do not understand the benefits of high-density living when paired with public transportation and the unbelievable, extensive and hard-to-see benefits that are imparted from this type of living. Cities like this have existed for a millennia, yet only in the past 100 years our country built the suburbs and created a car-driven society, which was created by a massive multi-trillion-dollar investment in roadway infrastructure, but for which the cost is now coming due. This rural, suburban, everyone has a car and every small town has massive roadway and services infrastructure. It is unsustainable. Density is amazing and brings incredible businesses and services. Public transit is incredible and it's just so much nicer to take a train than sit in a traffic jam in a $75,000 car that will be worth $15,000 in 3 years. High density attracts a great number of businesses and services, so you get things like amazing restaurants and High density usually attracts cultural institutions. Mass transit allows these businesses to operate with large foot traffic because lots of people can live close to your business. High density means our government spending per capita is vastly more efficient. Things like roadways, bridges, sewer systems, SC. There are many more who can explain it better than I can, but rural folk, especially in the US, have been brainwashed into thinking that cities are like some kind of evil, new, radical idea. Story 14. I currently live in one of the biggest cities in the world. I grew up in Appalachia in one of the smallest. Something people back home don't understand is how many people live here and how that affects statistics. You see it all the time during elections when people share maps where the state is mostly red except for a few urban counties. They aren't dumb. They understand cities are more densely populated, obviously, but it's on such a scale it is hard to conceptualize. There are apartment buildings that hold more people than my hometown. Some hold more than the entire population of my home county easily. My hometown could be 100% red, it isn't, but just to simplify things, and it would be outvoted by a single apartment building in Philadelphia, as it should be. The scale does weird things with the perception of safety. We've had 2 in the last 10 years, while my current city has obviously a ton more. People and businesses get robbed all the time, but back home we know the robber, so it feels less scary. Back home people see news about awful things in the city and assume it is much, much less safe. But the per capita violent crime rate is actually less in the city. There is just more people, thus more crimes are able to be reported. Domestic violence is an epidemic in my hometown. Not saying it isn't a problem in cities, but I know people who live through horrors in their own homes in my hometown be terrified to visit my city. Crimes in my hometown aren't politicized into making the national news like crimes in Los Angeles are. For example, a bunch of teenagers decided to meet up and steal from the mall in Louisiana that made national news. In my hometown, when that happens, the teenagers get some community service and get grounded by their parents or beat. It never in a million years would be on the news. Story 15. I make a lot of money at my job that is in a city. I have amazing restaurants all around me. Bands I like come through my city constantly. Last concert it only took me 12 minutes to drive home from. There are constantly cool events and festivals happening. I also don't live shoulder to shoulder with millions of people. I live in a beautifully landscaped apartment complex with 2 pools and a gym. Food trucks come weekly. It's also not hard to get out to the middle of nowhere if you want. It's like a 20-minute drive in the right direction. I grew up in a very rural place. Literally more cows than people in the county I grew up in. 3,000 people in the closest town. The city is much better. In my opinion, being anonymous is nice too. I don't run into some douche I went to high school with when I go to the store. People stay out of my business and I stay out of theirs. And if I'm being honest, the worst people I have ever encountered are consistently small town folk. These people that are supposed to be the kindest salt of the earth will turn on you real quick if they don't like your beliefs or color of your skin. These rude city folk are often much nicer since we have to live and interact with each other constantly. In my opinion and experience, of course. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like more of this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your thoughts in the comment below. I'll see you in the next video.